The story began with a voice whispering, "Daughter, I'm sorry." A lifeless girl lay on the ground, her body still, a metal pipe beside her and a backpack nearby. In front of her, a middle-aged man knelt, overwhelmed with despair. He murmured again, "Daughter, I am sorry, I killed you." As he stayed there in his grief, a virtual number appeared above his head. Tears streamed down his face as he continued sobbing, confessing, "I killed you not just once but 99 times." The man cried uncontrollably, broken by the sight of his daughter's corpse. Eventually, he stood up and wiped his tears away. In a low, resolute tone, he said that he had only one chance left. He begged her to trust him, calling her Damie, before his expression twisted with rage and determination. Gritting his teeth, he vowed, "This time I absolutely won't fail you." Suddenly, the scene shifted. A man, presumably the protagonist, was watching TV. On the screen, a reporter announced the appearance of mysterious creatures in the city center. The man silently observed the broadcast as the news showed zombie-like creatures attacking civilians. Narrating over the footage, he stated that the world had collapsed in an instant. Just then, a voice entered the room. Someone called out, "Dad, what are you looking at?" It became clear that this man was the same one who had cried over the dead girl, Ryu Minseok. Looking at his daughter, he said, "We have to survive." The scene cut abruptly. Minseok was in the middle of the street, cradling Damie in his arms. Tears poured down his face as he pleaded, "Damie, wake up, please don't leave me behind." Narrating once more, he reflected that the world had become hell for an old man and a young girl. They had both died, and he too had ended his life when everything came crashing down. In that moment of despair, a rope snapped and a mysterious, celestial, goddess-like being appeared before Ryu Minseok. The being smiled at him. He narrated that he had been given another chance. Minseok woke up in a cold sweat. Above his head, the number 99 glowed. Sitting up abruptly, he muttered, "I am perfectly fine. What is going on?" He glanced sideways and saw his reflection and the floating number. He questioned it, "This number on my head, what is it?" Without wasting another second, he ran to his daughter's door and banged on it, shouting, "Damie, Damie, open the door now." She opened it and yelled back, "Seriously? It's the middle of the night, what is it?" Panicked and breathless, Minseok asked her, "Damie, are you okay? You're alive, right?" Damie stared at him, confused by his frantic energy, and asked if he'd had a bad dream. He didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed her hand, opened the door, and pulled her out, gearing both of them up to leave. Damie protested, Seriously, what's wrong?" He snapped back, "No questions, just follow me." Outside, the streets were covered in blood and chaos. Minseok insisted there was no time. Damie resisted, saying, "Dad, let go, you're hurting me, explain what's going on." He furiously shouted, "If we don't hurry," but before he could finish his sentence, a zombie lunged from behind and killed him. The next moment, he woke up again in his room. This time, the number above his head had dropped from 99 to 98. Looking into the mirror, he muttered, "I'm back again." And the number went down. It dawned on him then, this number represented his remaining lives. Ryu Minseok now had 98 lives left. Simply put, it was the number of chances he had left to save his daughter. The scene shifted again. Someone Minseok was smashing a zombie-esque skull in with a golf stick. He narrated that he had done everything possible to save her, even if it meant abandoning his humanity. Time moved forward. He now had only 71 lives left. He had failed again. In one scene, he abandoned a woman in his car to be devoured by zombies, clenching his jaw while hiding behind the vehicle. He told himself, "I did it all for your sake." Despite this, Damie was still caught and overwhelmed by a horde of zombies. She looked back at her father as the creatures consumed her. Minseok, surrounded and clung to by more zombies, took out his knife and stabbed himself, resetting his life. The counter now read 52. He kept narrating that he eventually realized something. He fought zombies again, this time wielding a baseball bat wrapped with metal strings, hooks, and screws. He crushed skulls left and right, his blows brutal and unforgiving. Now with a beard and only 13 lives remaining, Ryu Minseok continued smashing zombies, exhausted yet relentless. He said, "Eventually I realized, even if I had 100 or 1,000 chances." Once more, his daughter had turned into a zombie. She looked at him and cried, "Dad, save me." But she lunged at him. And this time he let her bite him. He muttered, "A weak father like me can only lead his daughter to death." Then, pulling out his handgun, he aimed it at himself and pulled the trigger. Ryu Minseok was seen waking up in his room once again, regressed. Tears streamed down his face as he lay motionless on the bed, hopelessness weighing heavy on his soul. Though his body stirred to life, his eyes remained vacant, devoid of emotion. His daughter awoke shortly after and asked, puzzled, what all the noise was about so late at night. Meanwhile, Ryu Minseok was silently packing his things, a knife gripped tightly in his hand. When his daughter looked up at him, she was stunned by the eerie, killer-like expression on his face. She called out to him, alarmed, but instead of answering, he stepped forward and embraced her. He leaned toward her ear and whispered softly, promising that no matter how many times he failed, even if it took hundreds of thousands, even millions or billions, he would survive and save her. Stepping back, he told her to trust him. "Okay, sweetheart," he said. His daughter looked at him, confused, her eyes full of questions. The scene then shifted back to the beginning of the story, to the timeline where Ryu Minseok had only one life left. He was seen carrying the lifeless body of his daughter, whom he had failed to save yet again. He solemnly stated that it had taken 99 attempts to find the perfect shelter. Standing atop a mountain, he looked down upon a city partially enclosed by massive walls. He entered the shelter and continued narrating, explaining that the soldiers of the combined military base protected the place while university hospital staff cared for the survivors. Thanks to fate and circumstances, order had never been lost. Happy faces of children, parents, and survivors filled the shelter. It was truly the perfect home. As the narration went on, Ryu Minseok was seen aged, sitting in a wheelchair, a bouquet of flowers resting on his lap. He stated that he had spent his entire life in that shelter. In front of numerous gravestones, he said it had already been 40 years since he arrived. He addressed his daughter, saying she had waited a long time. He had to be cautious because this was his final chance. He placed the flowers onto her daughter's grave and declared that he was now certain the shelter was safe. If they could just make it there alive, it would be their final destination. Smiling warmly, he looked down and told her to wait because her dad, Ryu Minseok, would come get her soon. Then, placing a handgun to his head, he pulled the trigger. The scene shifted abruptly to his last chance at life. If he died now, there would be no more regression. This time it would be final. Fully packed and heading out with his daughter beside him, Ryu Minseok looked at her and she at him. He began narrating again, recounting that just before reaching the final shelter in Daejeon, his daughter Dami had died because of his mistake. Frustration etched on his face, he gritted his teeth, seething. He had spent 40 years repeating events hundreds of times, perfecting every detail just to keep Dami alive till the end. This time he swore he wouldn't make any mistakes. With resolve, he opened the door, but what awaited him was not what he had anticipated. A horde of zombies stood outside, not just a few, but a massive swarm. Shocked, he uttered the word variable. In 40 years and tens of thousands of rehearsals, he had never accounted for this single variable. He froze. It had never happened before. In the 99 previous regressions, there had never been zombies at the door. The unexpected presence of the horde left him momentarily paralyzed. One zombie noticed him and lunged, followed by the rest of the swarm. Their mouths opened wide, reeking and ready to bite as Ryu Minseok stared stunned. He muttered that the one condition he had always taken for granted, the safety of the entrance, was no longer valid. Just then, Dami called out from behind, breaking his trance. Acting on instinct, Ryu Minseok shoved her back into the house. She fell to the ground inside as he gave her one last look and shut the door. She stared back at him, horrified, her expression frozen in fear. As the door slowly closed, Dami screamed, banging against it, begging her father to open it. Meanwhile, the zombies overwhelmed Ryu Minseok. They bit into him from every direction as he gritted his teeth, his eyes widening with pain. He narrated metaphorically, comparing the agony of losing a child to having his intestines ripped out. He had felt that same pain 99 times already. On the other side of the door, Dami wept as her father continued his internal monologue. This pain of death, he had grown used to it. Memories of baby Dami flashed before him, her tiny hand gripping his finger as he smiled down at her. Back in the present, he tried to comfort her. "Don't cry, my child," he whispered in his mind. Two separate worlds unfolded, one where Dami sobbed in anguish and the other where her father was being torn apart by zombies. Between them stood a door. As Ryu Minseok's vision blurred and consciousness faded, he questioned if this was truly the end. Was he going to die forever this time? But then he remembered the horrifying image of Dami turning into a zombie. That memory sparked something in him. With sudden strength, he erupted with a defiant no. In a burst of sheer willpower, he lifted the horde of zombies clinging to his back. Gritting his teeth, veins bulging with exertion, he declared that it didn't matter if he had to die 100 or 1,000 times. As long as his daughter was still alive, he couldn't allow himself to die. With one final shout, he transformed completely, throwing back the swarm of zombies that had been tearing into him. One of the zombies rose, its mouth stretching open as it emitted a bizarre guttural noise. But before it could do anything more, a hand suddenly emerged, none other than that of our boy, Ryu Minseok. He had leapt forward with ferocity and in a blink dashed toward the creature, tearing its head clean off its shoulders. Without pause, he surged ahead, annihilating the zombies in his path one by one. He kicked, punched, and used his sheer brute force to rip their heads off as if they were nothing more than paper dolls. Amid the chaos, one of the zombies managed to sink its teeth into Ryu Minseok's shoulder. But in an unexpected twist of retaliation, Minseok bit back at the zombie with equal savagery, then gripped its head with his hand and violently ripped it off. He didn't stop there. He punched another zombie square in the gut, thrusting his fist with such power that it tore through the creature's torso, piercing clean through. With primal energy, he lunged at the oncoming undead, wielding them as blunt weapons against the others. Using the corpses, he struck down the zombies strewn on the ground, smashing their skulls into the floor with merciless force. Yet despite the massacre, countless zombies still remained. Ryu Minseok stood his ground, now fully transformed. His body was ripped with toned muscles, illuminated dramatically by the silver glow of moonlight cascading over him. He turned his head and looked back, casting a cold, lethal stare at the horde. His muscles glistened under the light, taut and defined. The zombies, seemingly enthralled or maybe enticed, began to inch forward, driven by an eager hunger to bite into the figure standing before them. As they advanced, his voice continued in narration, speaking of hundreds of failures. The scene shifted to the interior of a house where Dami lay near the door. The door creaked open, and through her tears she looked up, only to see Ryu Minseok standing there. His voice narrated again. It had been the 100th failure and yet another chance was given to him. He told Damie not to worry even if he was no longer human. He would protect her until the very end. As he smiled down at her, his transformation was complete. His pupils burned red, his skin had turned a pale white, and golden strands of hair cascaded from his head. Once inside the house, he looked at her and asked, "Are you all right, my sweetheart?" And inwardly he assured her, repeating to himself, "Dad will always protect you." The scene had shifted dramatically since the 7th day of the zombie outbreak in Seoul's Mapo district. A shopping mall named Mart stood in the chaos, its entrance barricaded hastily with aluminum scraps. In front of it, an annoyed army officer cursed under his breath, with a group of other officers gathered behind him. Standing before them were Ryu Min-seok and Damie. The frustrated officer demanded to know who they were. Behind Ryu Min-seok, Damie timidly hid. The officer remarked that the area was swarming with zombies and questioned how they managed to arrive there alive and unharmed. Growing more suspicious, he threatened to blow Min-seok's head open if he didn't speak. But something about Min-seok's face caught the officer's attention. He squinted, asking what had happened to it. A sudden realization struck him, and he muttered, "No way." Ryu Min-seok had donned orange sunglasses to conceal his red eyes. The officer probed further, asking if he was a celebrity and what the deal was with the sunglasses. Ryu Min-seok stayed silent. Just then, a strikingly beautiful woman emerged. She had a commanding presence, an hourglass figure, and exuded authority. She brusquely told Min-seok to get lost. This was Cha Hyori, known by the codename Widow Spider from the Tiho unit. An ex-captain, she approached Min-seok directly, stating there was no place for him there and that he should leave. As she stood face to face with him, she asked if he was deaf before repeating her command to leave. But Min-seok remained unfazed, puzzling her. He then began to act, claiming his daughter had been wandering outside all week, her asthma worsening. He pleaded, saying she was barely holding on. Damie played along, coughing weakly. Min-seok begged them to at least take his daughter in, insisting he would do anything. Damie, caught off guard, looked shocked at his plea. Cha Hyori, expressionless, simply listened to the entire spiel. But moments later, she became visibly irritated. Meanwhile, the earlier officer scoffed, calling Min-seok insane and accusing him of trying to manipulate their captain with emotional theatrics. He walked up to Min-seok and mocked his attempt. Surprisingly, the ploy worked. Cha Hyori burst into tears, leaving the officer completely stunned. Through her tears, she turned back and told them to let Min-seok and Damie in. She clarified sternly that they shouldn't get the wrong idea, they just needed more people to guard the mart. From behind, the army officer cheekily told her to wipe her nose, pointing out the slimy snot leaking out. Cha Hyori turned away, pretending nothing had happened. Ryu Min-seok watched her silently and smiled to himself. Inwardly, he remarked that she was still the same Captain Cha Hyori. He noted how she had regrouped surviving soldiers in the Mapo district and guarded the mart as a retired soldier. Though cold-blooded like a snake, she was strangely susceptible to displays of parental sacrifice, but his moment of reflection didn't last. Damie suddenly called out to him, shouting "Dad," and startling him. She began berating him, yelling that what he did back there wasn't part of the plan at all. Ryu Min-seok tried to explain, saying it wasn't what it looked like. Their argument was cut short when the army officer instructed them both to follow him. Damie, momentarily forgetting she was supposed to be playing an asthma patient, began coughing again. The officer, unimpressed, told her to cut it out, but Damie overdid it, holding her head and pretending to be dizzy. The officer grew irritated, thinking she was faking. Min-seok, continuing the act, rushed to support her. However, it became clear the dizziness wasn't fake. Min-seok, concerned, inwardly noted that Damie's mental state was collapsing rapidly. He feared for her if she didn't get rest soon. He reflected that two variables were causing this: the traumatic incident a week ago where Damie thought she had lost him, and something else he barely understood himself. He remembered being bitten by a zombie yet surviving and gaining strength enough to overpower them. His body had changed so much, he barely recognized himself. He wondered aloud if he had truly become a zombie. He then shifted his thoughts to the A-Mart Hapjeong branch, recognizing it as the optimal survival spot in the early days of the outbreak. With abundant supplies and stationed defense forces, he believed Damie would be safe there. As they walked into A-Mart, he noticed something strange and remarked on the collapsed building next door. He recalled that it had never collapsed before. The army officer found his comment odd, jokingly asking if Min-seok was from the future. He then explained that 3 days ago zombies stormed in. Cha Hyori had fought them off, shooting zombies through the head. The officer continued, recounting how their captain had lured the horde into the neighboring building alone. A visual showed a massive cluster of zombies being herded inside. She had pre-planted explosives and detonated them, crushing the zombies. The officer joked that they were probably like dried squid now. Some may have survived by pure luck, but they were trapped inside, rotting slowly. As the officer spoke, Ryu Min-seok stared intently at him. Noticing the look, the officer sneered, asking what that face meant and if Min-seok seriously believed a zombie could crawl out of the pile. At that exact moment, a grotesque blob-like zombie appeared behind the officer. The creature had 4 eyes and drooled thick saliva from its monstrous mouth. The officer, in shock, turned around to see the horrifying beast. Before he could react, the giant zombie raised a massive fist and punched the officer into the ground, shattering it and sending debris flying. Amidst the chaos, Captain Cha Hyori ran to the side, only to notice the zombie's fist descending towards her. At the last moment, she dodged it and the fist crashed into the ground. Soldiers began shouting in panic, questioning where the zombie had come from. Cha Hyori moved into position, ready to fire, while in the background Dami appeared terrified and Ryu Minseok was seen comforting her. Cha Hyori gave the command for all units to open fire and the army responded immediately. Soldiers unleashed a barrage of bullets at the giant zombie. Bullets riddled its body, but the monstrous creature let out an ear-piercing scream and charged at the soldiers, pulling back its fist. With one devastating swing, it annihilated the group in an instant. Amidst the carnage, one army officer remained alive on the ground. As the zombie monster towered above him, it raised both hands, preparing to crush him. Just as it was about to strike, a backpack came flying and struck the zombie in the face, distracting it. Capitalizing on the moment, Cha Hyori rushed in, grabbed the soldier, and escaped. She scolded the soldier, asking if he wanted to die and told him to get it together. The soldier managed a weak agreement, but Cha Hyori muttered to herself, urging herself to focus, reminding herself that this wasn't like 3 days ago and that this was no ordinary zombie. Glancing at a marked building, Cha Hyori shouted for everyone to run to the mart and they obeyed. As they ran, Ryu Minseok called out, telling Cha Hyori to wait. She snapped back, telling him to shut it and just run. While running, it became clear something was off with Ryu Minseok. He abruptly turned around and sprinted toward the giant zombie, launching himself upward with a clenched fist. Just as Ryu Minseok was about to strike the monster, the scene cut to Cha Hyori's narration. She explained that they would lure the creature to the barricade outside the mart where even it wouldn't be able to break through in one go. While it was stuck, they could find its weak spot. Suddenly, she noticed something and paused. She saw people still on the first floor and questioned aloud why evacuation hadn't been completed already. Civilians on the first floor looked horrified, staring at something. Cha Hyori stopped in her tracks, cursing under her breath, and gave an order to a soldier, saying she would distract the monster so the soldier and the others could go inside. But she quickly realized that only 2 people, Dami and the soldier, were there. She shouted at Dami, asking why she was alone and where her father was. Furious, Cha Hyori assumed the worst, asking if Ryu Minseok had really abandoned his daughter and called him a bastard. Dami didn't say a word but simply pointed to the right. At that moment, Cha Hyori heard a loud thump and turned her head. Ryu Minseok was seen crushing the giant zombie's skull with a powerful blow from his joined fists. The zombie collapsed with a heavy thud, and Ryu Minseok stood on top of its body, continuing his brutal assault. Civilians, along with Cha Hyori and the army soldier, stared in terror. One father among the civilians quickly shielded his daughter's eyes from the gruesome scene. The zombie was now dead, and Ryu Minseok emerged from the top of its corpse. Standing in front of him was Cha Hyori, staring at him intently. Ryu Minseok apologized, admitting that he couldn't keep up, that he failed to keep the promise he made to her, and confessed he was scared she might get hurt. In the next moment, Cha Hyori pointed her gun at him and demanded to know what he was. Ryu Minseok didn't respond directly. Looking undeniably badass, he simply declared, "I am Ryu Minseok." As he prepared to remove his sunglasses, Dami, panicking, silently pleaded with her father not to go through with it. She begged him not to reveal the truth. Still, Ryu Minseok went on, proclaiming himself as Dami's dad and a zombie expert. After uttering that bizarre claim, a heavy silence fell between him, Cha Hyori, and Dami. Breaking the silence, both Dami and Cha Hyori questioned him in unison. "Expert." Ryu Minseok explained that since the outbreak began, he had been analyzing the zombies, studying their behavior and weaknesses to survive. Smiling at both of them, he said he was just glad he could help and hoped they could continue working together. Cha Hyori appeared to accept the explanation, even smiling as she responded, "So that's what it is." But in the next instant, she closed the distance between them and placed a dagger at his neck, revealing she wasn't buying his story. Dami, startled, cried out, asking what she was doing. Cha Hyori snapped at her to shut her mouth and then spoke to Ryu Minseok, pointing out that he had taken down a zombie monster with his bare hands and that his red eyes looked just like a zombie's. Coming closer to his face, she demanded the truth. She asked him directly, was he really human? Ryu Minseok stuck to his lie about being a zombie expert, but Cha Hyori clearly wasn't buying it. She threatened him, her voice carrying that sharp edge of disbelief and menace, asking if he was kidding her. She raised her suspicion even further, pointing out that he had taken down a monster with his bare hands, a creature that bullets couldn't even dent, and that his red eyes looked exactly like the monster's. Her dagger hovered dangerously close to his neck as she demanded once again to know if he was even human. Right at that moment, Ryu Minseok deflected the accusation, insisting that the bullets had been effective. Cha Hyori's expression shifted to puzzled disbelief as he turned toward the massive blob of a zombie nearby and clarified that it had already been weakened by gunfire and he had only finished it off. He explained that the creature, an eater, was a zombie formed by the fusion of 2, destructive and specialized in defense, but he revealed its weakness, the jaw. Internally, though, he reflected with dark honesty that it still required the force of a sledgehammer to even damage it. Hyeri then demanded an explanation about his red eyes. Moving closer to her, Ryu Minseok coolly explained that he had a congenital lack of melanin, which was why he covered his eyes since his gaze made people uncomfortable. She listened to his explanation, her expression unreadable, while he pressed the question of whether she still believed he looked like a zombie. After hearing everything, she was taken aback but internally decided he was still suspicious. She thought to herself that there was definitely something going on, but there was no such thing as a zombie who protected his own daughter. At that moment, Damie stepped between them, breaking the tension. Hyeri turned and with a begrudging tone gave them permission to enter, warning Ryu Minseok that she'd be watching him. With dripping sarcasm, she called him Mr. Expert and started walking away. Her eyes caught the bodies of her fallen soldiers and a flash of sadness crossed her face. Two soldiers rushed up to check on her, but she snapped, kicking one's leg hard enough to make him growl in pain. She barked at both of them, saying that in emergencies they should immediately guide everyone to the basement parking lot, then demanded why they hadn't done so. The first soldier stammered that they'd been panicked. She fired back furiously that if the monster hadn't been killed, everyone in the store would have died, and with rage simmering in her tone, warned that if it happened again, forget zombies, she'd be the one to kill them herself. The first soldier, fully understanding the threat, saluted and said he got it while she turned away. The second soldier, still clutching his leg, glared at her with anger. The scene shifted to the store's main square where a flock of survivors had gathered. Among them were Ryu Minseok and Damie. She whispered in relief, saying it was good no one had found out his secret and teased him for lying so shamelessly. She admitted her heart had almost burst, worrying he'd slip up. Ryu Minseok clarified to his daughter that Captain Hyeri wasn't the type to fall for brain-rot nonsense and definitely not the type to wield a knife carelessly. Damie, curious, asked if he knew her. Taken aback, he recalled all the journeys and shared moments he and Hyeri had experienced in previous regression attempts, but faked his answer, saying it was just the way she looked. Damie side-eyed him, asking if he even knew what brain rot meant or where he'd learned it. Smiling, he said he'd learned it from his daughter. She shot back that she'd never taught him that. He smiled again, saying she'd taught him a lot actually. As he remembered all the past regressions and time spent with his daughter, Damie, she questioned, a lot. But at that moment he stood up, telling her to stay put while he got some food for her. She remained clueless about how she'd taught him the phrase, brain rot, while he left, glancing back at his daughter as he walked away. He recalled a day earlier when Damie had handed him sunglasses, telling him to promise never to reveal how strange he'd become, warning that people might try to hurt him if they found out. She'd repeated, promise me, okay. Back in the present, Ryu Minseok gathered supplies for Damie, internally reflecting that she was right. If his identity was revealed, the people here would lose their minds. After speaking with other survivors and collecting supplies, he returned to where Damie lay sleeping peacefully on the ground. He quietly announced his return, but seeing her asleep, he simply took out a blanket and covered her. As he did so, his mind churned with unease. Zombies were appearing faster than before. Over 100 had swarmed his house door, plus a mutant had shown up in just a week, a pace he had never seen in his past 99 lives. The situation was becoming unpredictable. He wondered why the zombies were changing, but deep down, he already had a hunch, because of him. The scene shifted into a wide shot of the destroyed city, crumbling under the weight of the zombie apocalypse. In the distance, a shadowy forest stretched behind the ruined skyline, and inside that forest shuffled a grotesque zombie with its tongue dangling out like some broken faucet. Meanwhile, Ryu Minseok stood deep in thought, his mind looping on one brutal certainty. He could feel that the zombies were after him. They wanted him dead and his daughter too. He couldn't tell if it was because their existence annoyed the undead or because those monsters were actually afraid of them. But one truth rang loud and clear. He was a variable to them, a glitch in their system, something that couldn't be ignored. As the horde gathered in the dark woods, Ryu Minseok stood right at the center, clutching onto a step ladder like it was his weapon of choice. Surrounded by snarling corpses, he smirked with sarcastic energy, noting that all the zombies in the area had somehow gathered here. He stomped the ladder into the dirt, the moonlight dripping over his frame like a spotlight, and taunted the horde, announcing that there was no need to keep searching. Threatening them with a calm menace, he pushed the tempo, declaring that they should hurry it up before his daughter woke up. With zero hesitation, he snapped the ladder in half with his raw strength, veins bulging across both arms as he casually remarked that he had to get breakfast ready before Damie opened her eyes. The horde didn't wait. Out of the shadows, a nightmare of a zombie with multiple arms let out a piercing scream, triggering the entire mob to charge. But Ryu Minseok didn't give a single fuck. He swung the broken ladder like it was a god-tier weapon, decapitating the first zombie in one brutal strike, its head flying clean off. Step by step, strike by strike, he hacked through the crowd, the ladder ripping bodies apart as if the undead were nothing more than paper dolls in his path. Then the ground trembled, an enormous zombie appeared and lunged forward, tearing off his left arm in one sickening chomp. Blood sprayed, flesh flew, but Minseok didn't flinch. He kicked the beast back while his severed arm literally spun through the air. Pinning the hulking monster down with savage force, he suddenly regenerated his missing arm in real time, flexing the newly grown muscle into a menacing fist. With pure rage, he punched the living hell out of the creature's skull, shattering it, before swinging back to kill more of the approaching zombies with the remnants of his ladder. The chaos didn't stop. From beneath the dirt, a worm-like zombie erupted upward, its grotesque body crawling with multiple faces fused into its flesh. From those cursed faces, it spewed a bluish-pink gas, spraying it as a toxic attack. The gas wrapped around Minciok like a suffocating mist, but instead of falling, he emerged from it unscathed, looking like an apex predator. Using the ladder in both hands, he descended on the worm zombie with one crushing strike, obliterating it instantly. Not slowing down, he yanked two axes from his back and went full berserker mode. With wild, merciless swings, he hacked the fuck out of the horde in front of him, his gaze cold and cutting right through as he split skulls and severed spines. Finally, he locked eyes with the many-armed zombie that had triggered the earlier charge. It lunged with its chaotic limbs, but Minciok slammed it down with his knee, pinning it to the ground as it screamed. With a ruthless finish, he brought his axe down and lopped its head clean off. His figure stood menacing in the moonlight, eyes blazing with one sole intention, to kill them all. The scene then shifted to the next morning inside a mart. Damie lay asleep in the safe house, curled in comfort until she slowly stirred awake. Stretching her tiny body, she spotted her dad, Ryu Minciok, standing there with a plate in his hands. On it was rice, meat, and some canned food, arranged neatly with a tiny heart shaped into the rice itself. He sweetly presented it to her, making sure she had something warm to eat, and she looked at him with pure joy, smiling bright as she answered with an eager yay. The two shared that small, soft moment as the bright sun lit up the day outside the A-Mart. Meanwhile, inside Cha Hyori's office, the vibe was anything but soft. Her temper flared as she interrogated a soldier, slamming her desk in frustration. She demanded to know if he was messing with her, but the soldier stood firm. He explained that between 1 to 5 a.m. something insane had happened. She had heard it too, the strange noises that shook the night. And now their scouting team confirmed it. Every single zombie in the area was dead. Piles of corpses stacked high, and everyone watching this video knew who was behind it. Cha Hyori's fury only deepened. She snapped at the soldier, shouting how any of this could make sense, asking if he was seriously suggesting the zombies had just beaten each other to death. But the soldier admitted even he struggled to believe it, yet he swore on his own eyes. He had seen it himself. In disbelief, Cha Hyori sat back down, her mind racing. All those zombies wiped out in just 4 hours. What the actual hell was going on? Then, in a moment of realization, she shifted her tone. Composing herself, she ordered the soldier to gather the people. The soldier hesitated, stunned by the command, but Cha Hyori's decision was final. As of that moment, she announced, a mart was officially initiating its evacuation plan. The scene shifted to show one civilian staring out of a glass window with an eerie intensity. He told everyone that it was real. He insisted that those rotten things, those monsters, were nowhere in sight. Observers noticed that near the A-Mart there were indeed no zombies anywhere, and the civilians visibly relaxed and felt very happy. One civilian remarked that they were really gone. A woman shouted in happiness and declared that she had heard it clearly. Soldiers spoke among themselves, and even the usual ambient noises felt different, because the zombies were completely gone. The crowd erupted in cheers and relief, voices repeating that it was true, the zombies were gone and they were finally safe. Ryu Minciok and Damie watched all of this unfold. Damie told her dad that she thought the zombies were really gone. Ryu Minciok, holding a safety helmet, put the helmet on Damie first. Damie looked at her dad as he, with a serious voice, warned her to listen carefully. Whatever happened later, she must not take off that helmet. Damie, puzzled, asked what he meant by later. At that moment, Cha Hyori and soldiers appeared from behind, Cha Hyori carrying a red microphone. She raised the microphone and loudly addressed the civilians in front of her, gathering their attention, and announced that although the cause was still unknown, all zombies in the area had been confirmed eradicated. The crowd erupted into happiness, exclaiming that it was true and that they were saved. Cha Hyori then interrupted their celebration to announce with a serious expression that they would be evacuating the area. The previously cheerful crowd turned puzzled and asked about evacuating. A man in a pink hoodie questioned Cha Hyori, checking that he had heard her correctly. Another man confirmed that she had. People wondered why they should evacuate if there were no zombies. Cha Hyori explained that 3 days earlier, just before communications were lost, they had been in close contact with a specific military unit. The 2nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, presumed to be the only surviving brigade in the Gyeonggi region. She reported that the brigade still had an entire battalion with armored units, and most importantly, that they were accepting civilians. The crowd scoffed. One man said she wanted them to leave based on a single radio message, and another challenged how she could verify its legitimacy. Cha Hyori assured them there was no need to worry because she knew exactly who had sent the message, a man commonly known as Blue Hawk. A figure of a man with toned-back muscles and a strong, firm presence was described, a middle-aged man who carried the aura of a true soldier with incredible power. Cha Hyori continued, insisting that if it was from Blue Hawk then the message could be trusted completely. The civilians, still unconvinced, retorted, "Trust my ass," and accused her of ordering an evacuation based on a message cut off 3 days earlier. One accused her of telling them to walk to their deaths. A fierce argument broke out between Cha Hyori and the civilians. Using the microphone and sounding angry, Cha Hyori warned that if the zombies returned they would not survive. A civilian in the crowd shouted that they absolutely would not evacuate, suggesting the zombies might never return. Another man mocked Cha Hyori angrily, claiming he had known this would happen, and he criticized her for making emotional and reckless decisions, implying that if a man had been the leader things would have been different. The crowd's response to that misogynistic comment was tense. Suddenly, a voice cut through the argument to defend Cha Hyori. Ryu Minseok stepped into the middle of the crowd and asserted that the zombies would return. The crowd turned their attention to him. The man who had been discriminatory found himself terrified when Ryu Minseok approached. From that man's perspective, Ryu Minseok appeared as monstrous as a zombie might, an image that made him feel like a target for being eaten. The man snapped back to reality, sweating, while Ryu Minseok told him that staying there was like being meat on a platter for the zombies. Was that what he called survival? Ryu Minseok, cold and blunt, declared that it was just waiting around to die. He passed the terrified man who remained huffing from the encounter while his daughter asked her dad what was wrong. Other civilians questioned Ryu Minseok, asking if following the soldiers would guarantee their survival. Ryu Minseok answered coldly that he could not guarantee anything. The crowd sneered, calling it all talk. Then stepping forward and standing before them, Ryu Minseok posed a chilling, practical question. If they did not follow the soldiers, could they survive without them? That question acted as a reality check and left the crowd in stunned silence. It forced people to reckon with the hard truth of the situation. One man conceded that Ryu Minseok was right. Another agreed that without the soldiers they were dead meat. A man with specs gathered people and suggested they go, acknowledging that they had made it this far thanks to the military. The mood shifted rapidly, the rebellious atmosphere folded into excitement as the civilian crowd rallied. They cheered, saying, "Let's give it a shot, let's trust the soldiers, and let's follow them." Cha Hyori was shocked and internally reflected that in an instant he, meaning Ryu Minseok, had changed their minds. Her eyes flicked toward Ryu Minseok and she wondered internally, who the hell was this guy? Ryu Minseok stood with a slight smile. Noticing Cha Hyori looking at him, he said there was no need to thank him. Cha Hyori, taken aback, asked when she had thanked him. Ryu Minseok thought to himself about situations where things had not been in his favor and how he had often had to convince people, recalling his past struggles during the apocalypse. He explained that it was also for his daughter and for himself. He extended his hand and said that if Cha Hyori led, they would make it, no doubt. Cha Hyori was stunned by that confident endorsement. After a brief pause to collect herself, Cha Hyori took the microphone again and proclaimed loudly that from that moment forward the escape mission began, and she declared that she, Cha Hyori, would get all of them to safety. Then the scene shifted, throwing the audience straight into the chaos of a destroyed city. Two buses full of civilians were rolling through the ruins, guarded front and back by armored military vehicles stacked with soldiers ready to protect against any zombie ambushes. The camera moved inside one of the buses, catching Damie staring out the window while an old woman kept her gaze locked on her. The tension was thick, silent, but heavy. The perspective jumped to a smaller vehicle, soldiers packed inside, their faces dead serious. Leading the mission was none other than Captain Cha Hyori, her presence unshakable, steady like steel. A signboard flashed by on the road, showing where the path ahead would lead. The soldier driving, Sergeant Shin, muttered that it had been so long since he'd crossed the Han River. He admitted it felt strange. But Cha Hyori wasn't here for nostalgia. She reminded them to stay locked in, stressing that this was only the beginning. Right then, the soldier beside Sergeant Shin notices something incoming and warns Sergeant Shin. Their eyes widened at what appeared in front of them, a lone zombie. In the blink of an eye, it charged at them, and like some cursed domino effect, more zombies emerged. What started as one turned into many, and in seconds a full-on horde was sprinting toward the convoy. Without hesitation, Captain Cha Hyori grabbed her radio, announcing that zombies were spotted. Her tone snapped with command as she ordered the operation to begin. Civilians and Team C were directed to move right while her squad swerved left. The call was sharp, move. The streets were instantly crawling with the undead, but that's when we get to no traits of zombies. First trait, zombies were way more sensitive to sound than to sight. The soldiers started tossing aluminum cans and other noisemakers, luring the swarm toward the left side, exactly where Cha Hyori's vehicle was headed. It worked, the horde followed the sound, and relief flickered across the soldiers' faces. But Cha Hyori wasn't letting up. She told Sergeant Shin to keep distance so they wouldn't get caught. Sergeant Shin's voice cracked with nerves, warning her there were just too many. The rearview confirmed it, zombies flooding behind them, closing fast. Shin called out again, panic lacing his words, saying they'd catch up soon. Hyori knew he was right, the swarm wasn't letting up. She ordered him to gun it toward Seongsan Bridge. The truck barreled forward, leading the massive horde onto the bridge. But then the reveal hit, the bridge was broken in the middle, half collapsed into the river below. The horde kept charging uncaring, proving the second zombie trait. No matter the situation, they always locked onto humans. Hyori counted under her breath, timing it out, whispering that they just needed to go a bit further. Then her command cut sharp now. Sergeant Shin cranked the wheel hard, swerving at the edge of the destroyed bridge. The truck pulled a brutal U-turn onto the other lane. That split-second maneuver caused the lead zombie to hesitate right at the edge of the drop. But the horde behind didn't stop. They slammed into each other, bodies piling up, then tumbling off the broken bridge straight into the river. The soldiers' truck smashed through stray zombies on the road, plowing forward though the fight wasn't done. Plenty of undead still remained. That's when the third zombie trait came into play. Their rear was their weak point. A guttural growl split the air as one zombie screamed. And then came the wild card. Out of nowhere, Ryu Minseok rolled in literally on a massive road roller. With zero hesitation, he flattened everything in his path, bodies crunching under the weight. His entrance was pure chaos energy as he roared his own announcement like some anime final boss. Road roller incoming. Ryu Minseok came dashing in like an absolute beast, driving his massive road roller straight through the chaos and crushing every zombie unlucky enough to stand in his way. He narrated in his head that this machine wasn't just some regular hunk of metal, it was a heavy-duty juggernaut, capable of flattening anything beneath its dozens of tons of raw pressure. This was the undisputed king of construction vehicles, the road roller. Zombies popped like grapes under its monstrous weight, blood spraying everywhere, but even with so many squashed, more were still crawling forward. One of them, a grotesque four-eyed freak, screeched and shrieked at him like it thought it stood a chance. In the very next instant, Ryu Minseok crushed the shit out of that abomination, rolling right over it without even slowing down. He went full savage mode, grinding down the rest of the zombies without mercy, the road roller chewing through the horde like a divine punishment machine. From the sidelines, Captain Cha Hyori and her squad of soldiers just froze, staring in horror at the sight, the endless blood, the guts spraying everywhere, and the way Ryu Minseok squashed the undead like they were nothing but bugs underfoot. The remaining zombies were shoved and bulldozed by the road roller until they were forced right off the bridge, tumbling helplessly into the river below while Ryu Minseok kept on, chilling like this was just another Tuesday drive. The scene then cut to a bus parked in a zombie-free zone where Cha Hyori's squad was supposed to regroup. Inside the cramped bus full of civilians, Damie sat with her back stiff, her hands clutching her bag so tightly her knuckles went pale. The old lady next to her mirrored the gesture, both of them radiating pure anxiety. A flicker of sadness clouded Damie's eyes. She was still waiting, holding on to the hope that her dad, Ryu Minseok, would make it back. Moments earlier, back when civilians were scrambling to evacuate Amart, Damie had snapped, her fury spilling over as she yelled at her dad. She demanded to know why it had to be him. Why him out of everyone? Ryu Minseok, calm yet dead serious, had told her there was literally no one else who could do what had to be done. He had tried to reassure her with a promise, saying she didn't need to worry and that he'd be right there with her. But Damie, sharp as always, shot back another question. What if the soldiers noticed something off? Her fear hung heavy in the air. Back in the present, tension spiked again. A soldier inside the bus suddenly shouted that Captain Cha Hyori's team was returning. Damie and the old woman whipped their heads to the window. Damie's mind echoed with her father's words, "Don't worry, I'm just playing support," but her heart pounded as she spotted him. Ryu Minseok rolled up on the damn road roller, casually waving at her like some badass dad. But the moment her eyes caught sight of the blood all over the machine, dripping down like a slaughterhouse on wheels, and the soldiers literally stuck onto the roller's sides, her jaw dropped. Baffled, didn't even begin to cover it. That was when Captain Cha Hyori's voice ripped through the tension, ordering Sergeant Shin to fall back immediately. Sergeant Shin barked out a quick yes and pulled back as more zombies came surging forward. Ryu Minseok wasn't phased though, he steamrolled them flat in seconds. The soldiers clinging to the road roller were straight up hyped, one of them yelling that they had just broken through in one shot. The perspective shifted again. The squad of survivors finally rolled into the Gyeonggi region. The civilians and soldiers alike looked stunned but relieved. One soldier hollered to Cha Hyori with joy, and even she couldn't hide the happiness on her face. They had actually made it. They all shouted in triumph, "We did it." Their arrival clocked in at exactly 6:45 p.m. The announcement rang clear. 2nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, all personnel had successfully arrived. Ryu Minseok recognized it instantly. This brigade was one of the major units that had survived deep into his past life thanks to its solid leadership. Reaching it in just 8 days, that was record-breaking speed. Still, his smile faded. He knew better than to get cocky. Just because he had grown stronger didn't mean Damie was safe. If he slipped even once, she could pay the price. He reminded himself that he would stick to the proven route from his past lives, because the real battle. It was only just beginning. The soldiers, riding the high of survival, turned their praise toward Ryu Minseok. One called him Mr. Expert, gushing about how amazing that was. Another admitted flat out that they hadn't been thrilled about him joining the squad, but he had just saved them all. Yet another soldier pointed out that they had seen the road roller earlier, but none of them had even dared to try driving it. They asked if he had worked in construction before. Ryu Minseok shook his head. He had simply learned because the more knowledge you had, the better your chances of survival in this nightmare world. 2 soldiers hopped off the road roller, followed by Captain Cha Hyori and Ryu Minseok himself. As his boots hit the ground, Ryu Minseok casually remarked that he was just glad they had arrived safely. Cha Hyori, clearly reluctant but still honest, admitted it was thanks to him. Ryu Minseok immediately teased her, pushing, asking what she just said. She tried to brush it off, but he pressed, refusing to let it slide, until finally she snapped, face red, and shouted at him to shut the hell up. Before the bickering could escalate, two soldiers approached, standing tall and saluting. They welcomed Captain Cha Hyori, and one of them declared they had been expecting her. Behind them hung a massive banner with the words, "Actions speak louder." The one who stepped forward introduced himself as Sergeant Lee In-hui, company commander of the 1st Battalion under the 2nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade. Cha Hyori returned the salute but immediately demanded to know how he recognized her. Lee In-hui explained calmly that they had been informed. Colonel Cha had told them someone of her caliber would definitely arrive today. That stunned her. She couldn't believe Colonel Cha had said that, but Lee In-hui confirmed without hesitation. Then, almost casually, he added that Colonel Cha had also said a stubborn female officer would inevitably cause a scene. Cha Hyori trembled with pure rage while her soldiers in the back tried and failed to stifle their laughter. She shot them a deadly glare and they went quiet instantly. Grinding her teeth, she asked where Colonel Cha was now. Lee In-hui answered that he had gone to the rear gate because zombies had popped up there. Cha Hyori's fury snapped again as she demanded to know if Colonel Cha had gone to handle them himself, leading the unit. But Lee In-hui, sweating under her glare, admitted nervously that no, the colonel hadn't led a unit. He had gone alone. Alone to deal with zombies. As those words sank in, the fierce figure of Colonel Cha emerged, cutting into the scene like the embodiment of raw defiance. The scene shifted and a soldier declared while looking at his wristwatch that it had taken exactly 35 minutes and 27 seconds. The focus moved to the brigade's rear gate where soldiers were stationed on the watchtower. They shouted down to Colonel Cha, announcing that he had set a new record. Colonel Cha noticed the time he had taken to wipe out the zombies and, as always, reminded them that the axe beats guns any day. With a swift move, he slashed the head off another zombie, then cracked a smile. He added that slicing these bugs was way more satisfying than shooting them, and the carnage around him proved his point. He had already beheaded plenty and now held one of their severed heads in his grip, an axe in his other hand. The introduction hit like a drum roll. This was the former Special Warfare Command Leader, now the current commander of the 2nd Mechanized Infantry Brigade, Colonel Cha Pengho, also known as the Blue Hawk. From the watchtower, soldiers called down that maybe next time he should just use a gun to kill the zombies, since that was literally their job. Another, more concerned soldier asked what he would do if he got bitten. At that, Colonel Cha burst into booming laughter, scoffing at the very idea of being bitten by such weaklings. Pulling the severed zombie head close face to face, he grinned wickedly and said that once someone reached his level, they could see everything at a glance. Combat strength gauged instantly just from a look. Then his tone shifted, loud and ruthless, blasting the soldiers. He barked that their pathetic trash-tier combat was useless to him. What kind of help were they even offering? All they did was get in the way. One soldier muttered that his words were harsh. Another admitted it was infuriating but not exactly wrong. Colonel Cha, stretching his back after all the bloodshed, groaned about his aching spine. They teased him, saying he couldn't hide his age. He waved it off and demanded to know if there was anyone even halfway decent among them. From the watchtower, soldiers shouted that they could hear him just fine. At that exact moment, a massive zombie suddenly stood up behind him, growling. Colonel Cha caught the movement and raised an eyebrow, baffled that it was still alive. He taunted the creature as though it could actually understand him. The zombie let out a screech and charged, but before it could even touch him, a road roller came crashing through, crushing the monster flat. The driver was none other than Ryu Minseok. Shock rippled through the soldiers on the tower, who yelled out, demanding to know what the hell they were even looking at. Ryu Minseok parked the road roller right in front of Colonel Cha. Alerted, Cha looked toward the figure stepping out and froze in disbelief. His own words echoed back at him, when you're on my level you can see it instantly. And what he saw now shook him to his core. Watching Ryu Minseok walk toward him was like staring into hell itself, like facing death incarnate. To him, Minseok looked less like a man and more like a demon cloaked in malice. Minseok, calm as ever, introduced himself with chilling composure, saying he was Ryu Minseok and that he had come with Captain Cha Hyori. He explained that after hearing the situation he thought he might be able to help. But before he could finish his sentence, Colonel Cha lunged at him, axe raised, his towering figure casting a murderous shadow. With brutal force, Colonel Cha swung his axe straight at Minseok. The soldiers on the watchtower went pale, screaming out in disbelief, asking what their colonel was doing, pointing out that he was attacking a civilian. But the disbelief deepened when they saw the impossible. Ryu Minseok had stopped the descending axe with his bare hand. One soldier gawked, asking aloud if that was even humanly possible. As Minseok held back the weapon, another soldier yelled down, calling to Colonel Cha. But Cha, his instincts screaming in alarm at this new presence, immediately barked a warning. He ordered the soldiers inside, raising the red-level security alert, declaring that the one before them was not a man but a monster. And indeed, the sight was terrifying. Ryu Minseok's pupils gleamed crimson, his figure emanating menace. Yet Minseok remained calm. He acknowledged Cha, saying his sharp eyes couldn't be deceived. Then with chilling precision, he addressed him by his full name, Colonel Cha Pengho. The colonel froze, thrown off by the unsettling familiarity. But the next instant shattered everything. Minseok crushed the axe he was holding with his bare hand, splintering the weapon into pieces that flew across the ground. As shards of steel scattered, Minseok declared that he needed to stay here, and that meant convincing Cha. But words alone wouldn't cut it anymore. As the broken pieces of the axe fell around him, he said he'd use the method Cha preferred most. Colonel Cha's eyes lit up, not with fear this time, but with a twisted excitement. Minseok raised his hand, clenching it into a fist, stepping into a combat stance. He stated with absolute confidence that he would show who he really was.